Welcome to Future Conversations, the podcast that explores research through the lens of tomorrow by Monash University, Malaysia.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Meera Sivasodi, Professor of Practice, Digital Media and Communication at Monash University, Malaysia. Welcome to the podcast that's rooted on research, shaping the future through conversations today. The number of people affected by mosquito-borne diseases is rapidly growing due to population growth, movement of people from rural areas to cities, more international travel, as well as climate change. Now, we have seen an increased spread of Aedes mosquitoes, which has led to a higher number of dengue fever cases. Here in Malaysia especially, we know that's happening, but it is a problem throughout the world as well. According to the WHO, dengue fever is now considered a most critical mosquito-borne viral disease in the world, with global incidence increasing 30-fold over the last 50 years. Joining me, Scott O'Neill, founder and CEO of the World Mosquito Program, also a professor at Monash University.
Hi, Meera.
Hi, how are you, Scott? Welcome to the show and welcome to Malaysia.
Good. Yeah, thank you.
Scott is going to be talking to us about the science behind Wolbachia, which is a bacteria, its impact on global health, and the success stories from countries like Brazil and Australia who have had this program established in those countries to control dengue fever. Scott, what got you interested in mosquitoes? My God, there are like 3,500 different species of mosquito. What got you interested in it?
I think, my interest was when I was a young student doing a PhD. It seems like a long, long time ago now for me. But I was quite interested in doing something that I thought would be impactful. And there's many scientists working on cancer or on other types of diseases, but relatively few were working on tropical diseases. And so I sort of got pulled in that way. And on top of that, I was, very interested in insects. And so mosquitoes, tropical diseases, potential for impact, that combination pulled me in.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, insects are supposed to be the food of the future, but you chose mosquitoes, and in particular to look at dengue, the Aedes mosquito that causes either dengue or chikungunya or even Zika virus, right? So 20 years, what got you persevering, and where did you finally introduce this program? My research program's been going for, as you say, for a long time, and when I was a young scientist, I was working in the US, and it had become quite fashionable to be thinking about how we could prevent mosquitoes from transmitting disease agents to people, whether they be viruses or malaria parasites, for example. And so there was a lot of scientists working on that, but most of them were focused on the technical piece of how you could make a mosquito resistant to carrying a pathogen. And very few of the people were thinking about how you could, if you could do that, how you could then spread that trait through millions of mosquitoes that are living in the wild, in the city. And so I sort of came at it from that direction with this bacteria called Wolbachia that I'd been studying. I thought it was an opportunity where we could transform insect populations or mosquito populations in the wild, and so take what was really a bit of science fiction at that time into some sort of reality. And so while it was fashionable at the time, and so we were able to get research funding for it, the approach I took was to look at this Wolbachia bacteria because I thought it would be able to be applied in the field and it would work in the field. Yeah. Okay, then that means, where does this Wolbachia actually sit? How did you get this bacteria from where?
So it occurs naturally in the environment. Up to 50% of all insect species naturally carry it. So if you were to go outside this building where we're sitting now and walk around in the garden or amongst the plants, you'd see some insects hopefully out there. And about half of the different insects that you would see would naturally have Wolbachia.
Why?
Why? Well, it's a big question. Why?
Is it for their immunity, or because it sort of has an antiviral property? It does, but Wolbachia has a number of tricks to be a very effective colonizer of insects. So it's able to distort the reproduction of insects to benefit its own transmission, and through that it's become extremely successful. And so it's one of the most when you think about the number of species of animals that it infects, mainly all insects, it's become, you can consider it to be one of the most successful parasites on the planet. And so it's in many, many insects quite harmlessly, but not in the mosquitoes that transmit these viruses that we're interested in. And so my laboratory many years ago was interested in how we could transfer it from fruit flies that occur naturally into these disease-transmitting mosquitoes.
Right. And you have genetically modified mosquitoes. Can you explain to me this whole process of...
I'm going to correct you because they're not genetically modified.
Okay.
So GMO or genetically modified has a very specific legal meaning, and it's something, a technical distinction of how you change the genetic chromosomes, if you like, of an animal. But we haven't done any of that. All we've done is taken this naturally occurring bacteria and placed it into an insect that doesn't normally carry it. Many, many millions of insects naturally carry Wolbachia, but not this mosquito, Aedes aegypti. But there's no genetic modification to the bacteria and no genetic modification to the mosquito.
And hence it's harmless.
Yeah, so obviously we needed to do a lot of risk analysis to make sure it was harmless, and that's been shown to be the case. And I think intuitively you can sense that it's not going to be a problem because it's already around us. As I said, if we walked outside, you'd encounter it. Mosquitoes that bite you already but don't transmit pathogens to you carry it already. You eat it regularly. Most people don't realize that there's a lot of insect material in our food supply chain, but many of the insects that contaminate our food contain it. So, Wolbachia is all around us. So you can intuitively think that, well, it's not going to cause a great problem because if it was going to, we'd know about it already.
Yeah. Could you explain the process of how this occurs? How do you get Wolbachia into the male mosquitoes, if I'm correct, and then transmitting to the female mosquitoes? And explain that process to me.
So Wolbachia infects the ovaries of female insects, and then when those insects lay eggs, it passes the Wolbachia bacteria to the next generation through the eggs. So it's what we call a maternally transmitted endosymbiont. And so each generation, the Wolbachia goes from one generation to the next through the female's eggs. What's unusual about Wolbachia is that if a male insect has the Wolbachia, it won't transmit it. Only the females transmit it between generations. But what will happen is the sperm of those males will be modified so that when they are used to fertilize an egg, that egg, if it doesn't contain the same Wolbachia as was in the male, those eggs won't hatch. And so this is an indirect mechanism to favour the transmission of Wolbachia.
And it's interesting that only the females bite and transmit the virus, right?
Yeah, that's right. So females have large eggs, sperm cells are very small, and bacteria are quite large, and so there's only room for them within the eggs. There's not room for them within sperm cells, and so they only get transmitted through the female eggs.
Right. That's very interesting. Brazil, Colombia, Indonesia, Australia, and Mexico have already seen success in reducing rates of this disease. In fact, the government of Malaysia is planning to increase this operation. I think we're sort of testing it here in Malaysia as well. And when I read, I'm reading that we're adding about 10 new locations in which 10 new locations a year in wanting to expand to other states with this program. But I'm very curious, what was that process of moving from a lab setting to the real world with this project? Because it's very different. Were you afraid at all that this,
our program did the first Wolbachia mosquito releases in Australia many years ago now. And at that time, we were extremely cautious because we were very concerned that we didn't want to do something that would be harmful or have unintended consequences. So we did a lot of risk analysis prior to releasing anything. And then we monitored and followed it very carefully, our first releases, and they were done maybe almost 15 years ago now in Northern Australia.
This is in Cairns.
In Cairns, around the city of Cairns, and then later around the city of Townsville. And what we found was that there was no adverse consequences of those releases. Nothing unusual happened except that we saw almost complete elimination of dengue transmission in Australia as a result. So from there we went to look at the method in other locations, and so I had scientists working in my laboratory at the time from Brazil. We went to Brazil, we went to Vietnam. We did a very big clinical trial in Indonesia in the city of Yogyakarta, across the whole city. And the results from that trial were quite spectacular, in that we measured a 77% reduction in dengue transmission and an 86% reduction in hospitalizations across the city of Yogyakarta.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So have Cairns and Townsville continued this program, or and how long does it take for you to actually see results?
So one of the great things about the program is, unlike vaccination or unlike giving medicines to people for particular diseases, this intervention only has to be done once, and then the Wolbachia stays in the mosquito population. It's passed from generation to generation, and then we see ongoing protection. So in Australia, we just did 10 weeks initially of mosquito releases, and then to this day, 15 years later, the mosquitoes all have Wolbachia, and we don't have any dengue anymore, or any substantial amount of dengue. And so it doesn't have to be reapplied, so it's done once and then it's done. And because of that, it makes it incredibly cost-effective. So the measurements we have from health economists are that it actually becomes cost-saving for governments to deploy the technology. And so we have now been in a process of expanding to other countries around the world.
I mean, we have a vaccine now. I don't think they're going to be very pleased with you, because they've spent years researching and coming up with dengue vaccines. But, we've got 4 types or serotypes. Does that matter at all with the process that you're implementing?
So what we are doing is very broad-based in the impact. So it applies to all 4 dengue serotypes, but not just to dengue. It also blocks transmission of Zika, chikungunya, yellow fever, Mayoro. So it's one intervention that can potentially prevent 5 or 6 different diseases in the human population.
Okay, so with yellow fever and all of that, I can imagine there's a lot of potential in Africa.
Yeah, certainly. But, the interesting thing about yellow fever is that the mosquito is present here in Asia, and you have a massive population of people living here that are not immune to yellow fever and haven't been vaccinated for it.
Yeah.
And so, an interesting scientific question in public health is, when does yellow fever come to Asia? And when it does, what's going to be done about it? Because it will be devastating if it was to happen.
What will it take to trigger?
If
it's already existing?
Yeah, so it's probably about virus introduction. And so now what we're seeing with the development of Africa, a lot more movement of people between Asia and Africa, and the potential to bring virus into the country, into Southeast Asian countries.
Yeah, well, most of us need yellow fever vaccines before we actually go to Africa, so there's probably good reasons for that.
Yes, but I think that vaccination may not be the solution to preventing it completely.
Yeah.
And so I think most scientists would think it's a matter of time before there's a major problem that needs to be addressed. And so the intervention we're working on is a way to put in place a preventative step that doesn't that will prevent that from potentially becoming a crisis in the future.
Right.
Yeah.
We can prevent it, actually. So by doing this, or do you have to release a different type of mosquito for yellow fever?
No, it's the same. So the same mosquito transmits all of these viruses. So one mosquito could potentially create the problem with all of these diseases. Right. But one intervention then can prevent all of those interventions.
Okay, so it's the Aedes aegypti.
A vaccine will only prevent one of them.
Yeah.
And so the added complication with vaccination is that for dengue, as you mentioned, there are 4 different serotypes of dengue. There's this thing called antibody-dependent enhancement, which has created a problem for vaccine development, that if you get one strain or one serotype of the dengue virus, the antibodies your body makes can then make you more susceptible to the other 3, and so they can enhance disease. And so that's made vaccination quite challenging. And so the first vaccine that was developed and was prepared to be distributed had disturbing safety signals, because if it was given to people that hadn't been prior exposed, it could actually make disease worse in those individuals.
But as you said, it doesn't cover all serotypes as well.
The latest vaccine from Takeda has only been tested against 2 of the 4 serotypes, so we don't have any data yet on the impact on the other 2. It seems to be better than the first one from Sanofi in regards to not enhancing disease, but we don't know about its effectiveness on 2 of the 4 serotypes yet, so it's still quite early days.
I think there were some adverse cases in Philippines, if I'm not mistaken.
With the Sanofi one, there was, yes.
Correct. So if this is a very cost-effective and very effective program to control the Aedes mosquito, why aren't governments, why are you not sought after by governments to do this in many more countries? Because beyond Malaysia, Singapore, we've got Vietnam, we've got India. Why is it, that governments haven't taken this up?
Well, governments are taking it up. So at the moment, we're doing a national expansion across Brazil, which will see the intervention go into 38 cities in Brazil and potentially protect a couple of 100 million people there.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the issues is just because of the novelty of the technology. So whenever you have something new, you have early adopters, and then you have people who will sit back and watch and be more cautious about adoption. But what we're seeing at the moment with the effectiveness we're seeing of it, with the safety signals we see, and the cost effectiveness of it, we're starting to see more and more demand for it.
I was reading that, while you're talking about Brazil, they intend to release, 2 billion of Wolbachia into Aedes mosquitoes, or just a mix of other insects as well. And they're planning to introduce 2 billion a year, Scott. What does it take to release?
So we're involved in that project, and we've constructed a facility in Brazil, in the city of Curitiba, with the government of Brazil. That facility is producing 2 billion mosquitoes a year, and those mosquitoes will then be released across Brazilian cities to implement the method. And so if you want to scale up, which is what we're interested in at the moment, then you need to be able to introduce the Wolbachia. You need to grow mosquitoes that carry it and then release them into the field. So you have to have factories that actually produce the mosquitoes.
I was just going to ask you, what does this facility look like? I mean, how do you keep 2 billion mosquitoes how do you manufacture that? What does that look like?
It looks like a small facility, about 3,000 square meters, and it's fitted out. It's largely automated and fitted out with machines that provide the right environment for the mosquitoes to grow in. And when you think about it, if you think about KL or Singapore or anywhere, it's very difficult to kill these mosquitoes.
Yes.
And so it's not that hard to grow them. And so,
really?
the trick is to grow them at massive scale and very cost effectively.
Okay,
Yeah.
and you put them all in a what? What does it look like?
So the mosquitoes have an aquatic phase for the immature stages, and then they have an adult phase that flies around and bites us. And so the aquatic stage has to be grown in the factory, and so there are essentially racks of water that contain food for the mosquitoes and developing immature mosquitoes, and then they turn into pupae, and those pupae are then transferred into adult cages, and the adult cages are blood fed, and large numbers of eggs are collected off them.
They are blood fed.
They have to be blood fed mosquitoes to lay eggs.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing about why they're a problem for us.
I would love to visit one of these facilities, but it's tiny, as you're describing it. It's not a very big facility either.
No.
Okay, and What are the broader implications? I'm going to be very honest with you, Scott. I mean, as I said, there are 3,500 different species of mosquitoes. If you eliminate Aedes, which is what you're working towards, am I correct?
No.
Correct.
Sorry, yeah. And so this is a common misunderstanding. So it's possible to use Wolbachia as a way to suppress the mosquito population, but nearly all the countries that are using it around the world are not doing that. They're just introducing Wolbachia and not killing the mosquitoes, just making the mosquitoes unable to transmit the virus to people. Mosquitoes are staying in the environment. The mosquitoes are biting people. They're just not causing disease anymore.
Okay.
So it's actually quite a minimal ecological change. I think you are heading in towards the direction of, if you wipe out mosquitoes, is that going to be a problem? But we're not wiping them out. So we're leaving them there. We're just making them harmless to people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can they eventually become resistant to Wolbachia?
From what we see, in other insects, I think that's very difficult. As I mentioned to you, 50% of all insect species naturally carry it. So it's very adept at being able to maintain itself in insect populations. But I think with any biological intervention, which this is, we need to be aware that resistance could emerge. And so we're monitoring for it and looking for it. So far, we've not seen any examples of resistance developing. But something we need to be mindful of and to continue looking for. I think from the data we have, 15 years in the field, no sign of the effectiveness reducing. I think it's going to be unlikely that resistance will develop quickly. It may develop over a medium to longer term time frame, 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. And for me as a scientist, I'd be quite happy with that.
How do you monitor that this is actually working?
The amount of disease in the human population. So if we've got an area where Wolbachia has been deployed, we know that dengue levels drop dramatically in Australia by 98%, in Colombia, in Latin America, similar values. In Indonesia, we see hospitalizations drop by 86%. So that to monitor it, you can be monitoring the mosquitoes directly, or you can just look for the appearance of the disease in the community.
Yeah.
If you start to see disease picking up, then you need to look more carefully.
Correct. And lab-raised mosquitoes thrive in the wild. I mean, they're moving from, the lab to the wild quite seamlessly.
What they have to do is be grown in the lab, then they have to be released into the field. They have to find somebody to bite, and then they have to lay eggs. And then the next generation that comes through has to mate with the wild population, and Wolbachia will start to enter the wild population.
Okay.
So they have to be reasonably fit for that to happen. And I think it's a key component of a well-run program that the mosquitoes you produce in the factory are fit enough to be able to mate with the wild mosquitoes to be successful for the introgression of Wolbachia.
And I'm sure some won't be, right? Which is I think happens quite naturally to any species really when it's released in the wild.
Yeah, it's sort of it's part of the quality assurance mechanism of the factory that produces them to make sure they're fit enough to compete with the wild mosquitoes.
Yeah, it's almost like releasing domesticated mosquitoes who are raised and suddenly left in the wild to fend for themselves, isn't it?
Or like the analogy I would use is like hothouse flowers, growing flowers or plants in a glass house where they're very protected, and then bringing them outside and they have to survive. And so, we think a lot about these sort of things, though, and think about how do we maintain quality in the mosquitoes that are being bred in the laboratory so that don't have lower fitness than the wild mosquitoes.
Because mosquitoes also help with pollination. They're food for other insects or animals.
Some are, but not this one.
I've
got a good entomologist friend in Australia who calls Aedes aegypti. This is the mosquito, the one mosquito that transmits all these viruses we've been talking about.
Okay.
It doesn't live in mangroves. It doesn't live outside. It wants to bite people. More than anything, it loves people. It's a parasite of people. And it would prefer to live in your apartment inside. It would prefer to be near your bathroom where it can smell your odor. It would prefer to be where your dirty clothes are with your sweat on them. And so it's really not an outdoor pollinator or key feature of a mangrove ecosystem or anything like that.
Yeah.
Instead, my friend refers to it as the cockroach of the mosquito world. And so it's exquisitely adapted to living in cities where people live at high density, and that's where it wants to be.
Yeah, I mean, as you speak, I just imagine getting bitten, sitting in a very safe space. But maybe you'd be able to help me understand this. I mean, some of us attract mosquitoes. I mean, for some reason, they come and bite some people more than the other. Would you know why?
Yeah, so there's natural variation in people's attractiveness to mosquitoes, and it relates to the volatiles that come off your skin. And I hate to tell people this, but often those volatiles are created by bacteria that live on your skin. And so that's what the mosquitoes are smelling, the combination of your sweat, the bacteria that live on your skin naturally, and that's what draws them in. But there's another dimension to it as well, and it's that some people are more attractive to mosquitoes, but some people also complain more than others about mosquito bites. and so it can just be that the people are more sensitive, if you like, to being bitten than other people. They may not get any more bites, but they feel like they do. Yeah.
But it's interesting that we have bacteria on the skin which is attractive to the mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way, I hope. I mean, I shower every day, twice a day, so I don't know. No, I don't generally get bitten by mosquitoes. So I'm not sure. If, sometimes the bacteria on your skin does play a role as well, right? There are reasons for it. So how did you communicate this to people in areas that you released these Wolbachia infected Aedes mosquitoes? Let's take Australia, Cairns and Townsville. How did you convince the community that this is what we're going to do and that it is safe? Assure them that, hey, this is going to help in the longer term.
It was very interesting when we were in North Queensland, and we were doing it for the first time in the world there, and so we had to go to people and explain to them what we were doing, explain that it had never been done before, explain that we hoped it would reduce dengue, but we weren't sure if it would or not. It was a research project at that stage, and we spent a lot of time talking to people, listening to concerns, addressing those concerns. And what I found really amazing about those early experiments is that the people of northern Queensland in Australia are very open people and very friendly people, and while dengue was a big problem for them, it's not nearly as big a problem as it is in Southeast Asia. And there was a sense of a lack of selfishness in the people, which I found quite remarkable, and that there was a large motivation for the community to do it out of the sense of that it could be helpful to neighbouring regions, not just to them individually or personally, and almost an altruism that was a bit unexpected for me. And so we spent a lot of time doing community engagement and talking to people, and in the end the people were extremely supportive and hoping that it would result in improvements for their communities, but also for communities in other countries as well.
Did you come across communities who were resistant?
We have, with individuals that, you never find 100% of a community which will agree to anything. Yeah. There'll always be someone who will oppose something.
I mean, I'll be honest, the topic of Wolbachia was introduced many years ago in a previous life when I used to host a health show, and I used to be very concerned about it. My question was always about, what if it comes and bites you in the back? Right?
Yeah, I've been doing this work now for a long time, and we've deployed Wolbachia over nearly 14 million people now through our program. And when we do community engagement, it's nearly the top two questions are nearly always the same that we receive. Number one is, what will happen to me if I get bitten by these mosquitoes that contain Wolbachia? Will it be bad for me? And the second question is, what will happen to the environment, and will there be unintended consequences for the environment? And what I find really super interesting is that those questions come from people regardless of their social economic level, their education level, their cultural background.
I mean, I'm asking you the same questions.
And so I think that we've addressed them quite well, and in the risk analysis that's been done, but also through the work we've done where we've released them, and that nothing happens to you if you're bitten by them. And where the reassurance should be is that there are many mosquitoes naturally infected with Wolbachia that bite you every night, probably while you're sleeping.
Yes.
And they're not causing any problems. You're eating it, it's in the environment. All the risk analysis says that it's harmless, and that's what we see now. Over 14 million people, we're not seeing any adverse events related to people being bitten by mosquitoes with Wolbachia.
So who funds the World Mosquito Program? And I'll come to the fact that you're almost now moving towards commercialization of it's becoming a business. But initially, who funded you, and what does commercialization look like?
So we have a large number of funders. At the current time, the Wellcome Trust in London is a major funder. The Tahir Family Foundation was a major funder for the big trial that was done in Indonesia. The Australian government has been a big funder. So a number of groups have been funding us. And when you say about a business, we work as a not-for-profit. Our goal is actually to get the technology out to governments and to communities that wish to make or take benefit from it, and we're not turning it into a business. And
why not?
I think as a business, I think you have a trust issue immediately to deal with, and that is, what's your motivation for doing the work? Is it to make money, or is it to make the community a better, more healthy? And because we're releasing mosquitoes, which is immediately, I can tell from yourself, you're like, whoa,
yes.
I'm a bit concerned about that. I think if I was representing a business that was making money, that was putting dollars into investors' pockets, you'd be even more concerned. And so I think we do, there's an important piece around trust around all of the work that we do. And so we work as a not-for-profit to ensure people that our motivation isn't about money, our motivation's about public health.
Said like a true researcher. I always like, why aren't you thinking about the commercial aspect of this? You spent 20 over years. Who's paying for that, right? But okay, so coming back to the fact that we're facing funding cuts with what's happening in the US and all of that. Have you been affected?
Yeah, we've lost some US aid funding, and certainly in Latin America, our program's been impacted. It's a difficult time at the moment, I think, for many non-government organisations or charity groups that are working around the world, and us included. But at the end of the day, I think the people that need to fund it are governments, because at the end of the day, the amount of money that's needed can really only be supplied by governments, and it's part of the duty of governments to look after the health of their populations. And so one, we're not really business, and two, we're not really thinking about donors, we're thinking about governments and being partners to governments to help governments deploy the technology to protect their citizens.
Okay, I hope you're charging them enough, so
We just cover our costs, and we're happy with that.
How do you charge?
Well, we work out...
Per billion of mosquitoes?
Yeah, we work out the cost of producing the mosquitoes and of deploying them, and then, that's how we can work out what our price is. We have to cover the cost of the people who are employed to do the releases, to grow the mosquitoes, etc. But, we're not doing this to try and drive Lamborghinis around.
Why not, Scott? Come on. You've sacrificed so much of your life.
Different people are motivated by different things.
As I said, like a true researcher, right? I've met so many researchers who don't think about impact. And impact, yes, but the commercial aspect of it. Fair enough. Totally understand the psychology behind why you don't want to commercialize it. But at the end of the day, Scott, if this is a successful program and we sort of get rid of dengue fever, that's what you're aiming to do, right? What will you do?
I'll retire. I don't know if you can see my grey hair, but I'm getting towards the end.
Your business comes to an end.
Yeah, so I don't, our goal, when we think about the mission of our organisation and what we're trying to do, we're not trying to generate something to be a company that continues and generates money for its shareholders or the owners of the company.
Yeah.
We just have a single mission, and that's to deploy the technology that we've invented. And so, I've spent most of my life as a scientist and working on the development of the technology. For me, before I turn to other pursuits, I would just like to see the benefit of it being taken up by people that can benefit. And a lot of those people that will benefit are poor people in developing countries in the tropics of the world. And for me, the motivation is much more about the knowledge we've generated being used than it is about making money.
And perhaps applications in different areas.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So it will be your legacy, Scott.
Maybe.
It will
I
be.
think it's not just me. I think there's a range of other people.
A
For example,
team.
in Malaysia, there are other groups, not just our group working here. A number of groups working on this technology now, working with IMR here in Malaysia and in Glasgow, University of Glasgow and so forth.
Right.
And so there's
Fantastic.
communities of scientists around the world doing this. And and I
What's
think
your-
we'll be effective by not being commercial.
Yeah.
More effective by not being commercial. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I'm convinced now. I mean, I think you gave me a different perspective about trust.
Yeah, it's all about trust. In the end, at the end of the day, it's all about trust.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting looking at U.S. politics at the moment and the erosion of trust that's happening.
Yeah.
And I, I'm a believer in community, and I'm a believer in communities organising to look after themselves and to have the positivity of building a better world that doesn't have to be driven off money.
I need to digest that. It'll take a while. But what would you like to take away from this entire project?
I think there's been many people working on this. There's no one individual, and I think we've all been very passionate about the positive change that could result. It's a terrible thing to see patients with dengue. It's a terrible thing to see children die of a disease like dengue. It's a terrible thing to see hospitals choked with so many patients that they can't perform treatments for other diseases. And so that in itself is hugely rewarding, to think that you could be making positive difference for people through your curiosity-driven research of your younger years. And so that's enough for me. I'm happy to finish my career knowing that the technology is being taken up, and then I'm interested in becoming a beekeeper after that and doing honey production.
Sounds like fun as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but Malaysia, I mean, just on a separate note, Malaysia recorded a 0.6% decrease compared to 2023. Sorry, this is all based on 1 year. So in 2024, compared to 2023, however, deaths rose, marking a 17% increase from 2023. So
the numbers year to year, you need to be very careful with them, because dengue dynamics are quite complicated. And usually what we see is about 4-year cycles, where you'll have a very bad year, and that very bad year effectively immunizes a lot of the population against that particular dengue strain. And so the next year and the following year after that, usually you have much less dengue, and then there'll be a shift in the dengue strain, or you have newborns being born that are non-immune, and suddenly you'll get another big flare-up. And so it's interesting for me, as I look at countries around the world that have a bad year, like 2024 was a very bad year globally for dengue. And then the next year looks a bit better, and so everybody sort of wants to claim victory. And we've beaten it, it's all... and you see it over and over again. Then I have another good year, and they think, the problem's gone. And then the following year, bang, I get hit over the head again with it.
do we know why?
Yeah, it's mainly, there's a number of factors, but it's mainly due to the immune status of the human population.
Right.
And so it's a natural history of this disease. It comes in waves every few years.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, Scott.
Yeah,
That was
no
enlightening
problem.
for sure. I am convinced now, after many years. I am convinced. That was Scott O'Neill, founder and CEO of the World Mosquito Program, also professor at Monash University. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mira Sivisodi, Professor of Practice, Digital Media and Communication, Monash University, Malaysia.